Today, I'm going to tell you about the most intense sniper duel of my entire military career. A 4-day psychological battle in the desert against an enemy marksman who was picking off my men one by one. This wasn't just about marksmanship. This was about survival, strategy, and the kind of mental warfare that tests everything you've learned in 25 years of service. Don't leave this video because I'm going to share every detail of this operation that changed how I view combat forever. My name is Steve Harris, retired Sergeant Major with 25 years in the United States Army. Every day on this channel, I bring you real stories from military operations I've experienced during my service around the world. These aren't Hollywood fantasies. These are the real deal. The kind of missions that define what it means to serve your country. Before we dive deep into this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you get notified every time I share a new military story, and leave a comment below. I read every single one. Also, check out all the gear and products I use and recommend in the description below or in the first pinned comment. It was March 2007, somewhere in the desert regions of the Middle East. Can't get too specific about the exact location, but picture this. Endless stretches of sand, interrupted by rocky outcroppings and dried riverbeds that hadn't seen water in decades. The kind of terrain that makes you feel like you're on another planet entirely. Temperature during the day could hit 120 degrees, then drop to near freezing at night. It's the kind of place that kills you slowly if you're not careful, and quickly if you make a mistake. I was leading a reconnaissance patrol. 8 men total, all experienced soldiers who'd been through multiple deployments. We had Corporal Martinez, our communications specialist from San Antonio, tough as nails, and could make a radio work even after it had been through hell. Then there was Private First Class Johnson from Detroit, our youngest guy at 19, but sharp as a tack and eager to prove himself. Sergeant Thompson from Alabama was our medic, the kind of guy who'd run into gunfire to save a wounded soldier without thinking twice about it. Staff Sergeant Davis from Colorado handled our heavy weapons, an M240 machine gun that he carried like it weighed nothing. Specialist Rodriguez was our explosives expert, could disarm an IED or blow a door off its hinges with equal precision. Private Collins from Montana was another rifleman, quiet type, but deadly accurate with his M4. And Corporal Wilson from Ohio rounded out our team as our second communications guy and backup medic. Our mission seemed straightforward enough. Intelligence had indicated possible terrorist activity in a valley about 15 clicks northeast of our forward operating base. Reports of weapons caches, possible training camps, the usual suspects setting up shop where they thought we wouldn't look. Command wanted eyes on target, detailed reconnaissance and confirmation of enemy presence before they'd authorize a larger operation. We'd been moving through that godforsaken landscape for 2 days, using dried wadis and rock formations for concealment. The desert has this way of making you feel exposed, even when you're hidden. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every rock formation could be an ambush point. But we were professionals, and we'd done this dance more times than I could count. On the morning of day 3, we were establishing an observation post on a ridgeline overlooking the valley. Perfect vantage point. We could see for miles in every direction, had multiple escape routes, and good natural camouflage from the rocks and sparse vegetation. I was setting up my M24 sniper rifle, adjusting the scope for the morning light conditions when Martinez was getting the long-range radio ready to report our position to base. The desert was dead quiet, except for the occasional wind whistling through the rocks. That should have been my first warning. In my experience, when nature goes completely silent, it's usually because something dangerous is about to happen. Animals have better instincts than humans sometimes. They know when to get scarce. I remember looking through my scope, scanning the valley floor methodically, sector by sector, just like they taught us at sniper school. The magnification brought everything into sharp detail. Abandoned mud brick buildings, dried vegetation, a few old vehicles that looked like they'd been there since the Soviet invasion. Nothing moving, nothing that screamed enemy presence to my trained eye. That's when the world exploded. The first shot came from nowhere and everywhere at once. That's the thing about a good sniper. You don't hear the rifle report until after the bullet has already done its work. The crack of a high-velocity round breaking the sound barrier, followed immediately by the wet impact of lead meeting flesh and bone. Private Collins went down hard. No warning, no cry of pain, just there 1 second and gone the next. The bullet had taken him center mass right through his body armor at a spot where the ceramic plates didn't overlap perfectly. Whoever fired that shot knew exactly what they were doing. That's not a lucky shot. That's professional marksmanship at work. Training kicked in immediately. "Sniper, take cover!" I bellowed, and my men scattered like leaves in a windstorm. Everyone dove for whatever concealment they could find. Rocks, depressions in the ground, anything that would put solid matter between them and that unknown shooter. My mind was already working the problem. Direction of fire, the angle of impact on Collins suggested the shot came from the southwest. Probably from the ridgeline opposite ours, about 800 meters away. Elevation. The trajectory indicated the shooter was at roughly the same height as our position, maybe slightly higher. Wind conditions, minimal, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour from the east, not enough to significantly affect a shot at that range. But here's what really got my attention. Collins had been in a prone position, partially concealed behind rocks, presenting a minimal target profile. To make that shot, the enemy sniper would have needed an excellent scope, perfect range estimation, and the kind of patience that comes from professional training. This wasn't some insurgent with an old hunting rifle. This was a trained marksman, possibly military trained, definitely experienced. "Sound off!" I called out, needing to know the status of my team. "Martinez here, I'm good." "Johnson, okay. Thompson, I'm hit." That stopped my heart for a second until he continued, "Just fragments from a ricochet, I can still fight." "Davis, operational. Rodriguez, ready. Wilson, good to go." Collins wasn't responding because Collins couldn't respond anymore. I crawled over to Thompson's position, keeping low and using whatever cover I could find. The fragments he'd mentioned were from the bullet that killed Collins. High-velocity rounds tend to fragment when they hit body armor, and some of those fragments had caught Thompson in the left arm. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to remind us all how close we'd come to losing 2 men instead of 1. "Where's it coming from, Sarge?" Johnson whispered. The kid was handling his first sniper contact better than some veterans I'd seen, but I could hear the tension in his voice. I studied the terrain through my binoculars, trying to identify possible shooting positions. The ridgeline across from us offered dozens of potential sniper hides, rock formations, shadows, depressions that could conceal a man with a rifle. It was perfect sniper country, and whoever was over there had chosen their battlefield well. "Southwest ridgeline, approximately 800 meters, I told my team. "Professional shooter, military training. This isn't some farmer with his grandfather's rifle. Everyone stay low, watch your exposure, and remember, he can only shoot what he can see." The next 10 minutes were pure tension. We were pinned down, unable to move without exposing ourselves to another shot. I was trying to spot the enemy position when the second shot rang out. This one was aimed at Martinez, who had been trying to get a radio message through to base. The bullet struck the radio itself, destroying our primary means of communication in a shower of sparks and plastic fragments. That shot told me everything I needed to know about our opponent. He wasn't just trying to kill us randomly. He was being methodical, taking out our capabilities one by one. First our youngest soldier to create shock and fear, then our communications to isolate us. This guy was playing chess while most insurgents played checkers. "Son of a bitch is good," Davis muttered from his position behind a boulder. "Too good," I replied, my mind racing through tactical options. "Wilson, get the backup radio operational. Rodriguez, I need you to identify possible approaches to that ridgeline. Johnson and Martinez, you're with me. We're going to play a little game of hide and seek. The desert sun was climbing higher, and the temperature was starting to climb with it. Heat distortion would make accurate long-range shooting more difficult as the day progressed, which might work in our favor. But it also meant we'd be fighting dehydration and fatigue along with an enemy sniper. I began moving to a new position, using every piece of cover available and techniques I'd learned over 2 decades of military service. Bound and overwatch, fire and movement, all the fundamentals that keep soldiers alive in situations like this. But I could feel eyes on me the entire time, the uncomfortable sensation of being hunted by a professional killer. The third shot came 20 minutes later, and this time I was ready for it. I'd been watching the opposite ridgeline through my scope, looking for muzzle flash, dust signature, anything that would give away the shooter's position. When I saw the brief glint of sunlight on glass, probably his scope lens catching the light for just a fraction of a second, I was already moving. The bullet cracked past my head close enough that I felt the wind displacement. In that same instant, I saw the muzzle flash from a position about 50 meters north of where I'd been looking. The bastard was good. He'd been moving between shots, never firing from the same position twice, but now I had a general area to work with. Contact southwest, grid reference. I called out coordinates to my team while chambering around in my M24. The familiar weight of the rifle, the solid feel of the stock against my shoulder, the crisp image through the Leopold scope. These were things I'd trusted with my life countless times before. Through the scope, I could make out the rocky area where I'd seen the muzzle flash. Shadows and concealment everywhere, perfect for a sniper to hide and move between shots. I began the methodical process of glassing the area, looking for anything that didn't belong. A straight line in nature's curves, a color that didn't match the surrounding terrain, movement where everything should be still. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't see him, but somewhere in those rocks was a sniper who was probably doing exactly what I was doing, looking for me through his own scope, waiting for me to make the mistake that would give him a clear shot. This wasn't going to be a quick firefight. This was going to be a duel. Over the next hour, we played a deadly game of cat and mouse. He'd take a shot from one position, then move before I could return fire effectively. I'd displace to a new firing position, and he'd be waiting, ready to engage. Neither of us was getting a clear shot, but both of us were learning about our opponent with each exchange. I started to respect this enemy shooter, even as I planned to kill him. His discipline was impressive. Never rushed a shot, never fired from the same position twice, never exposed himself unnecessarily. The kind of patience and skill that comes from extensive training and combat experience. In different circumstances, under different flags, we might have been on the same side, but those weren't the circumstances we found ourselves in. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting longer shadows across the desert landscape, I knew we were in for a long fight. My men were professional soldiers, but being pinned down by a sniper for hours takes a psychological toll. I could see it in their faces. The constant tension of knowing that any moment could be your last, the frustration of being unable to effectively return fire. "Listen up," I told my team during a brief lull in the shooting. "This guy is good, but he's not invincible. He's human, which means he makes mistakes eventually. Our job is to be ready when he does. Stay alert, stay professional, and remember your training. We've been through worse than this, and come out the other side." It was true, but it was also a lie. I'd never faced an enemy sniper this skilled in terrain, this favorable to his tactics. This was going to test everything I'd learned in 25 years of military service. As darkness began to fall, bringing with it the blessed relief of cooler temperatures, I knew the real game was just beginning. Night operations favor the prepared, and I intended to make sure we were more prepared than the son of a bitch who'd killed one of my men. But before I continue this story, I want to recommend something that's been making a real difference in my life. You know, As you get older, you start noticing things. Maybe you're not feeling as energetic as you used to. Maybe you're dealing with some fatigue and just not feeling like yourself. I started noticing that I wasn't having the same firm, lasting erections I used to have, and that was affecting my confidence and my relationship. I began using a product that has completely changed my sexual life. It's natural, effective, and has given me back the confidence and performance I thought I'd lost. If you're dealing with similar issues, I've left the link in the description of this video or in the first pinned comment. It's been a game changer for me. Now, let's get back to our story in the desert, because the night was about to bring challenges I'd never faced before. The desert after dark is a different world entirely. Temperature drops 40 degrees in a matter of hours, and the silence becomes so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. But it also provides opportunities for movement that daylight doesn't allow. I gathered my team for a tactical discussion, keeping our voices low and our profiles minimal. "Here's the situation," I whispered. "We've got a professional sniper who knows this terrain better than we do. He's got the high ground, good fields of fire, and multiple escape routes. But he also has limitations. He's probably operating alone, which means no backup, no resupply, and no one to watch his back while he's focused through that scope." The plan I developed was risky, but staying put was riskier. We needed to turn this from a defensive situation into an offensive one. I was going to take Johnson and Rodriguez on a flanking maneuver, while the rest of the team maintained suppressive fire from our current position. The goal was to get behind the enemy sniper's position and eliminate him before he could do more damage to my unit. "Sergeant Thompson, you're in command here until I get back," I told our medic. "If we're not back by dawn, you call for extraction and get these men home." "Roger that, Sergeant Major," Thompson replied. But I could see in his eyes that he didn't like the plan. Neither did I. But sometimes you don't get the luxury of good options in combat. Johnson and Rodriguez checked their gear one final time. Night vision goggles, suppressed weapons, extra ammunition, and enough water to last until morning. We'd be moving cross-country through terrain none of us had mapped, toward an enemy whose exact position we could only estimate. As we prepared to move out, I took one last look through my rifle scope toward the enemy ridgeline. Somewhere in that darkness was a man who'd already proven he could kill my soldiers. In a few hours, one of us would be dead, and I intended to make sure it wasn't me or my men. The flanking movement began just after midnight, with the three of us moving in single file through the darkness, using natural terrain features for concealment and navigation. Every step had to be planned and deliberate. One loose rock, one careless footfall, and we'd give away our position to an enemy who was undoubtedly listening for exactly that kind of mistake. The movement through the desert that night was like walking through a minefield where every step could be your last. Rodriguez led our small patrol, using hand signals and his natural ability to read terrain in low-light conditions. Johnson followed in the middle, and I brought up the rear, constantly checking our six and listening for any sounds that might indicate we'd been detected. The desert floor was treacherous in the darkness. What looked like solid ground through night vision goggles could turn out to be loose sand that would shift underfoot, or sharp rocks that would clatter if disturbed. We were moving parallel to the base of the ridgeline, looking for a route that would take us up and around the enemy sniper's position without exposing ourselves to observation. After 2 hours of careful movement, we'd covered maybe half a kilometer, painfully slow progress, but necessary if we wanted to maintain the element of surprise. That's when Rodriguez held up a closed fist, the universal signal to freeze in place. Through the green-tinted world of our night vision, I could see him pointing toward the ridgeline above us. Movement. Someone was up there, and they were being almost as careful as we were. I studied the area through my scope, adjusting the focus for maximum clarity. There, a human silhouette moving between rock formations, carrying what was definitely a rifle. Our sniper was repositioning, probably looking for a better angle on the rest of my team back at our original position. This was the break we'd been hoping for. While he was focused on movement and navigation, he couldn't be watching for threats approaching from below. Rodriguez began identifying a route up the slope that would use the natural rock formations for concealment. It would be a difficult climb in full gear, but it would put us above and behind the enemy position. The ascent took another hour of careful movement, hand over hand up rocky slopes, testing each foothold before committing our full weight, constantly aware that a single dislodged stone could echo across the desert and give away our position. My muscles were screaming from the combination of tension and physical exertion, but adrenaline kept me focused and moving. By 4 in the morning, we'd managed to gain the high ground about 200 meters behind where I estimated the sniper's position to be. The advantage was now ours. We had the elevation, we knew approximately where he was, and he had no idea we were there. But that's when things got complicated. Through my scope, I could see our target area clearly. Multiple positions that could conceal a sniper, numerous routes for movement between them, and enough natural cover to hide a dozen men if necessary. The enemy shooter had chosen his battlefield well. Even with our tactical advantage, locating him precisely was going to be challenging. I was scanning methodically when I caught something that made my blood turn to ice water. A glint of light that shouldn't have been there, reflecting off what looked like an optical device. But it wasn't pointed toward my team's original position. It was pointed directly at us. The son of a bitch had known we were coming. "Down!" I hissed, and all 3 of us dropped flat against the rocky ground just as a muzzle flash lit up the darkness about 50 meters to our front. The bullet cracked over our heads close enough that I could feel the sonic boom, and the sound of the rifle shot echoed off the ridgeline like thunder. We'd walked into a trap. This wasn't just a skilled sniper. This was someone who thought tactically, who anticipated our moves and planned accordingly. He'd let us make the climb, let us think we had the advantage, then turned our own flanking maneuver against us. "Rodriguez, Johnson, spread out and find cover," I whispered. "This bastard is playing 3-dimensional chess while we're still figuring out checkers." The next few minutes were pure chaos. Our sniper began moving between positions, taking shots at each of us in turn, forcing us to keep our heads down and preventing us from establishing effective return fire. Every time one of us tried to acquire a target, he'd already displaced to a new position. But in his movement, I began to see a pattern. He was working along the ridgeline from north to south, using natural firing positions that had been prepared in advance. This wasn't random. He'd studied this terrain, probably for days, and had prepared multiple sniper hides, connected by concealed routes. That realization gave me the tactical information I needed. If he was moving in a pattern, I could anticipate where he'd be next. I began moving parallel to his route, staying low and using every piece of available cover. Rodriguez and Johnson were keeping him busy with suppressive fire from their positions, not necessarily trying to hit him, but forcing him to stay alert and move more quickly than he probably wanted to. 20 minutes into this deadly game of leapfrog, I saw my opportunity. The enemy's sniper had to cross a small open area between 2 rock formations, maybe 10 meters of exposed ground that he'd have to cover quickly. I positioned myself with a clear field of fire across that gap and waited. Patience is the sniper's greatest weapon. Not the rifle, not the scope, not the ammunition, patience. The ability to remain perfectly still, perfectly focused, for as long as it takes to get the shot. I'd learned that lesson in sniper school 20 years ago, and it had kept me alive through multiple deployments. The wait felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then I saw him, a dark figure moving quickly across the open space, rifle in hand, using the darkness and speed to minimize his exposure. But I was ready. My crosshairs settled on center mass just as he reached the middle of the gap. Breath control, trigger squeeze, follow through, all the fundamentals executed automatically after decades of training and experience. The M24 bucked against my shoulder, and through the scope, I saw the impact. The enemy sniper staggered, dropped his rifle, and disappeared behind the rocks on the far side of the opening. I'd hit him, but whether it was a killing shot or just a wound remained to be seen. "Target down," I whispered into my radio, but I wasn't celebrating yet. Wounded animals are often more dangerous than healthy ones, and wounded snipers can still kill you if you get careless. Rodriguez and Johnson began moving toward the area where the enemy had gone down. Using proper tactical movement and maintaining security, I provided overwatch from my position, scanning for any signs of movement or threats. The desert had gone quiet again, except for the sound of wind through the rocks. That's when I heard something that chilled me to the bone. The distinctive crack of a rifle shot, followed immediately by Rodriguez crying out in pain. The bastard wasn't dead. He was wounded, probably badly, but he still had fight left in him. And now he'd hit one of my men. "Rodriguez is down!" Johnson called out. "He's alive, but he's hit bad." The tactical situation had just gone from bad to worse. I had one man wounded and pinned down, another trying to provide aid under fire, and an enemy sniper who was wounded but still combat effective. Time was running out, dawn was approaching, which would give the enemy better visibility and potentially allow him to call for backup if he had reinforcements in the area. I had to end this, and I had to end it now. Moving from cover to cover, I began working my way toward the enemy position. Every shadow could hide a muzzle. Every rock formation could conceal a shooter waiting for me to make a mistake. The wounded sniper had the advantage of knowing his exact position, while I could only estimate where he might be. The mental pressure was intense. This wasn't just about marksmanship anymore. This was about tactics, psychology, and pure determination. Both of us were wounded warriors now. Both of us were fighting not just for victory, but for survival. The respect I'd felt for this enemy shooter was still there, but it was overshadowed by the cold fury of seeing my men hurt. As I moved closer to his position, I could hear him moving too. Labored breathing, the scrape of equipment against rock, the subtle sounds of a wounded man trying to maintain a defensive position. He was hurt worse than I'd initially thought, but he was still dangerous. That's when I saw the blood trail on the rocks, dark stains that stood out clearly through the night vision goggles. I'd hit him in the torso, probably center mass, and he was losing blood steadily. But blood loss takes time to incapacitate a determined fighter, and this guy had already proven his determination. Following the blood trail carefully, I moved from position to position, always checking corners, always maintaining security. Basic infantry tactics that had been drilled into me since boot camp, but amplified by the intensity of hunting another human being in close quarters. The final confrontation came sooner than I expected. As I rounded a large boulder, there he was, propped up against a rock wall, rifle across his knees, looking directly at me through his own night vision equipment. We saw each other at exactly the same moment, and time seemed to slow down to individual frames. He was Middle Eastern, probably in his 30s, wearing civilian clothes over military-style gear. Professional equipment, quality optics, expensive rifle. Definitely not some farmer turned insurgent. This was a trained soldier fighting for his cause, just as I was fighting for mine. For a split second, we just looked at each other, two professional warriors who had pushed each other to the limits of skill and endurance. In that moment, there was a strange kind of mutual respect, even though we both knew only one of us was walking away from this encounter. Then, training took over, and we both moved simultaneously. My rifle came up as his did, both of us knowing that the first accurate shot would end this duel that had lasted through the night. His muzzle flash lit up the darkness at the same instant mine did, two rifles firing almost as one, the reports echoing off the rock walls like thunder. I felt his bullet pass close enough to burn the air next to my ear. My shot took him center mass, and this time there was no doubt about the result. The enemy sniper slumped forward, his rifle clattering against the rocks, the fight finally gone out of him. For a moment, I just stood there in the darkness, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. The duel was over. The threat was eliminated. My men were safe, or at least safer than they had been a few minutes ago. But there was no celebration, no sense of victory, just the quiet satisfaction of a job completed and the immediate concern for my wounded soldiers. Rodriguez needed medical attention, and we needed to get him stabilized and evacuated as soon as possible. "Johnson, what's Rodriguez's status?" I called out as I moved toward their position. "Bullet went through his shoulder, Sarge. Lot of blood, but no major arteries hit. He's conscious and talking, but he needs real medical attention soon." I reached their position and immediately began assessing Rodriguez's wound, while Johnson maintained security. The bullet had indeed gone through his shoulder, missing bone but tearing through muscle and causing significant blood loss. Field dressings and pressure bandages would stabilize him for now, but he needed surgery within the next few hours. "Hang in there, Rodriguez," I told him as I worked on his wound. "You're going home with a good story and a Purple Heart." "Did we get him, Sergeant Major?" Rodriguez asked through gritted teeth. "We got him," I confirmed. "The threat is eliminated." As dawn began to break over the desert, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and gold, I was already planning our next moves. We needed to link up with the rest of the team, establish communications with base, and arrange for immediate medical evacuation. The mission had taken a turn none of us had expected, but we'd accomplished our objective and eliminated a significant threat. The enemy sniper's body would be searched for intelligence value, his equipment catalogued and analyzed. Every piece of information we could gather might help save American lives in future operations. But first, we had to take care of our own. What do you think happened when we finally made it back to base? How do you think Command reacted to our encounter with this professional enemy sniper? Leave a comment below with your thoughts on how this story ends. I love reading your predictions and insights. The journey back to our original position took most of the morning, moving carefully with a wounded man and maintaining security in case the enemy sniper had backup we didn't know about. Rodriguez was tough. He walked most of the way under his own power, though Johnson and I took turns helping support him when the terrain got difficult. When we finally linked up with the rest of the team, the relief on their faces was obvious. They'd heard the gunfire from our position and had been monitoring radio frequencies all night, waiting for word about our status. Thompson immediately took over Rodriguez's medical care, upgrading the field dressings and administering pain medication. "Sitrep, Sergeant Major," Thompson requested as he worked on Rodriguez's shoulder. "Enemy sniper eliminated," I reported. "One KIA on our side, one WIA. Mission accomplished, but at a cost." Wilson had managed to get the backup radio functioning and was already calling for immediate medical evacuation. Within 2 hours, we had a Black Hawk helicopter inbound to extract Rodriguez and transport him to the combat support hospital. The bird came in fast and low, kicking up a cloud of sand and dust that reminded all of us just how exposed we were in this desert terrain. As Rodriguez was loaded onto the helicopter, he grabbed my arm with his good hand. "Thanks for getting that bastard, Sarge," he said. "Collins would have appreciated it." The helicopter lifted off in another cloud of dust, carrying Rodriguez toward medical care and safety. The rest of us were left to complete our original mission, the reconnaissance of the valley that had been interrupted by our encounter with the enemy sniper. But first, I wanted to examine the sniper's position and equipment. Intelligence gathering is always important, but understanding how this guy had operated might help us prevent similar encounters in the future. Johnson and I made our way back to where the enemy had made his final stand. The dead sniper's equipment was impressive. A Russian Dragunov rifle with high-end optics, night vision gear that was better than some of what our own forces were using, and enough ammunition to sustain a long engagement. His personal effects indicated he was probably a foreign fighter, well-trained and well-equipped, not some local insurgent. Most interesting was a notebook we found in his gear, filled with detailed observations about American patrol routes, timing and tactics. This guy had been studying us for weeks, maybe months, learning our patterns and preparing for exactly the kind of encounter we'd just had. It was sobering to realize how much intelligence we'd been giving away without knowing it. "This changes things," I told Johnson, as we photographed the notebook pages for intelligence analysis. "This wasn't a random encounter. We were being hunted. The implications were significant. If one professional sniper had been operating in this area, there might be others. Our patrol routes would have to be altered, our security procedures updated, and our reconnaissance methods reviewed. The enemy was adapting to our tactics, and we'd have to adapt faster if we wanted to maintain the advantage. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you get notified every time I post new videos about military operations and experiences. Hit that like button if you're enjoying this story, and leave a comment below telling me what you think about this encounter. Also, check out all the products I recommend and use. They're linked in the description below or in the first pinned comment. The rest of our reconnaissance mission proceeded without incident, but all of us were more alert, more cautious than we'd been before. The valley we'd been sent to observe showed clear signs of recent enemy activity, weapons caches, training areas, and prepared defensive positions. The intelligence we gathered would be valuable for planning future operations in this area. But the encounter with the enemy sniper had taught us something more important than any intelligence about weapons caches. It had shown us that we were facing an enemy who was professional, well-trained, and patient enough to study our methods and turn them against us. The days of dealing with poorly equipped insurgents armed with outdated weapons were clearly over, at least in this area of operations. As we made our way back toward the forward operating base, I found myself thinking about the sniper we'd killed. In different circumstances, under different flags, he might have been someone I'd have respected as a fellow professional soldier. His skills were undeniable, his dedication absolute, and his tactical thinking sophisticated. He'd been a worthy opponent in the truest sense of the word. But war doesn't allow for the luxury of respecting your enemies while they're still shooting at your men. Respect comes later, after the threat has been eliminated and you have time to reflect on the encounter. During the fight, there's only the mission and the safety of your soldiers. The extraction helicopter arrived right on schedule, and we loaded up for the flight back to base. As the bird lifted off and the desert landscape fell away below us, I was already thinking about the after-action report I'd have to write, the intelligence briefings I'd attend, and the tactical changes we'd need to implement based on what we'd learned. Collins's body had been recovered and would be flown home with full military honors. Rodriguez would recover from his wounds and eventually return to duty, though it would be months before he was fully operational again. The mission had been completed successfully, but the cost reminded all of us why we took this job seriously. Back at the forward operating base, the intelligence officers were very interested in the notebook we'd recovered and the details of our encounter with the enemy sniper. The photographs and tactical information would be analyzed and distributed to other units operating in the region. Lessons learned in blood have a way of saving lives when they're properly shared and implemented. The debriefing lasted most of the day, with every detail of the encounter being recorded and analyzed. How the enemy had operated, what equipment he'd used, his tactics and techniques, all of it would become part of the institutional knowledge that helps keep American soldiers alive in combat zones around the world. But for me, the most important part of the whole experience wasn't the tactical lessons or the intelligence value. It was the reminder that in combat, there are no guarantees, no certainties, except that training and preparation give you the best chance of coming home alive. The enemy sniper had been skilled and determined, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the capabilities and determination of American soldiers. That night, As I lay in my bunk listening to the sounds of the forward operating base settling into its nighttime routine, I thought about Collins and the sacrifice he'd made. 20 years old, from a small town in Montana, died doing his duty in a place most Americans couldn't find on a map. His death had meaning because it was part of something larger than himself, part of the mission we'd all volunteered for when we raised our right hands and took the oath. The desert duel was over, but the war continued. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve alongside the finest soldiers in the world. That's what kept us going through the difficult times, the knowledge that we were part of something important, something that mattered. The weeks following our desert encounter brought changes to our entire area of operations. The intelligence we'd gathered from the enemy sniper's notebook revealed a network of foreign fighters who had been systematically studying American forces, learning our patterns, and preparing coordinated attacks against our patrols and convoys. Command took this information seriously. New protocols were implemented across all units in the region. Varied patrol routes, altered timing for operations, enhanced counter-sniper procedures, and improved coordination between units. The lessons we'd learned in blood were now helping to protect other American soldiers throughout the theater of operations. But for me personally, the encounter had been more than just another mission. It had been a reminder of why experience matters in combat, why training is never wasted, and why the bonds between soldiers are forged in situations where life and death depend on trusting the man next to you. Rodriguez recovered fully from his shoulder wound and rejoined the unit 3 months later. The kid was tougher than he looked, and the experience had made him more cautious without making him afraid. That's the mark of a good soldier. Learning from close calls without letting them paralyze your decision-making in future engagements. Johnson, our youngest team member, had proven himself during that long night in the desert. He'd kept his head under pressure, followed orders effectively, and showed the kind of courage under fire that can't be taught in training. When I recommended him for promotion to corporal, it was one of the easiest recommendations I'd ever written. Collins was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star for his service and sacrifice. His family received the flag that had covered his casket, along with the gratitude of a nation that often doesn't fully understand the price of freedom. I attended his funeral in Montana, where I met his parents and tried to explain how their son had died serving alongside some of the finest soldiers I'd ever known. His father, a Vietnam veteran himself, understood what I was trying to say, even when the words seemed inadequate. He knew the risks when he signed up, the old man told me. He believed in what you were all doing over there. That has to be enough. The enemy sniper we'd killed was eventually identified through intelligence channels as a former Iraqi Republican Guard member who had received additional training from foreign advisors. His presence in our area of operations confirmed what many of us had suspected. The insurgency was becoming more sophisticated, better trained, and more dangerous with each passing month. But it also confirmed something else that was more important. American soldiers, properly trained and led, could meet any challenge the enemy presented. The desert duel had been won not just because of superior equipment or tactics, but because of the quality of the men who wore the uniform and the depth of their commitment to each other and the mission. 3 months after the incident, I was called to a meeting with the battalion commander. Intelligence had identified another suspected sniper operating in a different sector, and they wanted someone with recent experience in counter-sniper operations to lead the response team. The enemy was learning and adapting, but so were we. "Sergeant Major Harris," the colonel said, "I know your team has been through a lot recently, but we need your expertise on this one. What do you think?" I didn't hesitate. "When do we leave, sir?" Because that's what soldiers do. When the mission calls, when your country needs you, when your fellow soldiers are counting on you, you step up and do the job. It's not about glory or recognition, it's about duty and the understanding that freedom isn't free, and someone has to be willing to pay the price. The second sniper operation turned out to be less dramatic than our desert encounter, but no less important. We used the tactics and techniques we'd learned from the first engagement, coordinated better with supporting units, and eliminated the threat before it could cause significant damage to our forces. Experience is the best teacher, and the lessons we'd learned in that desert had made us more effective at protecting American lives. As my deployment neared its end, I found myself reflecting on all the operations, all the challenges, all the young soldiers I'd had the privilege to lead during my 25 years of service. The desert duel was just one mission among many, but it represented everything I'd tried to teach young soldiers about courage, professionalism, and dedication to duty. War is ultimately about people. The people you serve with, the people you're protecting, and yes, even the people you're fighting against. The enemy sniper had been a skilled and determined opponent, but he'd been fighting for something he believed in, just as we were fighting for something we believed in. The difference was that what we were fighting for, freedom, democracy, the right of people to determine their own destiny, was worth the sacrifice. On my last day in that forward operating base, I walked out to the small memorial we'd erected for Collins and the other soldiers we'd lost during the deployment. Simple wooden crosses with names, ranks, and dates. Nothing fancy, but meaningful to those of us who had served alongside these men. I stood there for a few minutes, thinking about the cost of service and the price of freedom. Collins would never see his 21st birthday, would never marry his high school sweetheart, would never have the children he'd talked about during those long nights on guard duty. But his sacrifice had meaning, because it was part of something larger than himself. The desert duel had taught me that war is ultimately about ordinary people doing extraordinary things under impossible circumstances. It's about young soldiers like Johnson finding courage they didn't know they possessed. It's about wounded warriors like Rodriguez refusing to quit even when the pain is overwhelming. It's about professionals like Thompson and Davis and Wilson and Martinez who do their jobs with skill and dedication regardless of the circumstances. And sometimes it's about old soldiers like me who have to make the hard decisions and live with the consequences. When I finally rotated back to the States, I carried with me the memories of that night in the desert and all the other nights, all the other missions, all the other moments that had defined my military career. Some memories are painful, some are proud, and some are a mixture of both. But all of them are part of the story of American soldiers serving in distant places, facing difficult challenges, and doing whatever it takes to accomplish the mission and bring their brothers home. That story continues today with a new generation of soldiers who carry on the traditions of courage, honor, and commitment that have defined the American military for more than 2 centuries. The young soldiers serving today face different challenges than we did, but the fundamental requirements remain the same: courage under fire, loyalty to your fellow soldiers, and dedication to the mission. They have better equipment than we did, better training and better support, but they still need the same qualities that have always defined good soldiers. When I speak to young people considering military service, I tell them about the desert duel and other experiences from my career, not to discourage them, but to help them understand what they're signing up for. Military service is demanding, dangerous, and sometimes heartbreaking. But it's also honorable, meaningful, and essential to preserving the freedoms we all enjoy. The enemy sniper I faced in that desert was a skilled and determined opponent, but he represented something that ultimately could not stand against the dedication and professionalism of American soldiers fighting for something they believed in. That's the lesson I take from the encounter. And that's the lesson I hope young soldiers today will remember when they face their own challenges. War changes, technology evolves, and tactics adapt, but the fundamental truth remains the same. Freedom must be defended by those willing to pay the price for it. The desert duel was my contribution to that defense, and I'm proud to have served alongside the men who shared that burden with me. Today, as I tell this story to audiences around the country, I'm reminded that the freedoms we enjoy were purchased with the blood of soldiers like Collins and the dedication of soldiers like Rodriguez, Johnson, Thompson, Davis, Wilson, and Martinez. Their service matters, their sacrifice has meaning, and their story deserves to be told. The desert is quiet now where we fought that long night, but the lessons learned there continue to save American lives in conflicts around the world. That's the real victory, not the elimination of one enemy sniper, but the knowledge gained that helps protect future generations of American soldiers. And that's why I share these stories with you, not for glory or recognition, but so that the sacrifices made by Collins and thousands of other American soldiers will be remembered and honored. They served with courage, they fought with distinction, and they died with honor. Their legacy lives on in the freedoms we enjoy and the security we often take for granted. The Desert Duel was one mission, one night, one encounter in a career spanning 25 years and multiple deployments. But it represented everything I learned about leadership, courage, and the bonds that unite soldiers in the face of danger. Those lessons continue to guide me today, long after I've hung up the uniform, and they're lessons I hope to pass on to future generations of Americans who may be called upon to serve their country. When people ask me about my military service, about the wars I fought and the soldiers I served with, I often think about that night in the desert. Not because it was the most important mission I ever participated in, but because it reminded me why we serve, why we fight, and why the cause of freedom is worth every sacrifice we're called upon to make. The enemy sniper is long dead. The desert has reclaimed the positions where we fought, and most of the world has forgotten that a small group of American soldiers once fought a life-and-death battle in a remote corner of a distant war. But the values we fought for, courage, honor, duty, and loyalty, those values live on in every American soldier who raises their right hand and takes the oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's the real victory from our desert duel, not the elimination of one enemy, but the preservation of the values that make America worth defending. Those values will outlast any individual soldier, any single battle, or any particular war. They're what we really fought for during that long night in the desert, and they're what American soldiers continue to fight for today. The desert duel is over, but the mission continues. And as long as there are young Americans willing to serve their country with courage and dedication, that mission will succeed no matter what challenges the future may bring. That's my story from the desert, and I'm honored to have shared it with you. Remember to honor those who serve, support those who have served, and never forget that freedom isn't free. It's purchased with the dedication and sacrifice of soldiers who believe that some things are worth fighting for. Stay strong, stay proud, and remember, the best way to honor those who have fallen is to live lives worthy of their sacrifice.